In this lesson, we are going to discuss the different types of virtual machine instances that are used in cloud services. When using cloud computing resources, you will be billed based upon the resources being used. One of the biggest discussions you will face is whether to use spot instances or reserved instances, since this decision will drastically affect your costs. To better understand these costs, you can use reports from your cloud service provider to monitor and analyze your usage of their cloud-based services. Most cloud service providers offer different pricing depending on whether you're relying on spot instances or reserved instances for your virtual machines. Before we dive into these two types, let's take a moment to discuss the concept of a virtual machine instance. A virtual machine instance is a specific configuration for a virtual machine that is running within a cloud-based environment. These instances define the hardware specifications of the virtual machine, such as number of CPU cores, amount of memory, the amount of storage, which in turn can determine the performance, capacity, and cost of the instance. Different cloud providers offer various types of instances to accommodate different workloads, from small, single-core instances for developing to large testing, multi-core instances for the resource-intensive applications. The choice of instance types depends on the specific requirements of the workload, such as computational power, memory, and storage, as well as cost considerations. Each virtual machine instance is a virtualized version of a physical server that is provided by a cloud provider. It is a key resource in cloud computing and is used to host and run applications and services. In a cloud environment, organizations can create, configure, and manage multiple VM instances as needed. These virtual machine instances can be monitored and reported on to understand usage patterns, resource utilization, and performance. So let's take Amazon Web Services, for example. So they offer elastic cloud computing virtual machine instances, also known as EC2 instances, and they use either spot or reserved pricing models. The virtual machine is exactly the same in terms of its performance and hardware, but the pricing is vastly different between those two types. So AWS offers over 500 different instances or configurations or virtual machines labeled as nano, micro, small, medium, large, extra large, and in the variations from A1 to T4 and beyond. Let's use an example of the AWS EC2 instance that is configured as a T3 small instance. This would give us a virtual machine with 2 virtual CPUs, 2 gigabytes of RAM, elastic block storage, and up to 5 gigabits of network transfer per second. Now, regardless of whether we use spot instance or reserved instance, we will get to use the same hardware and receive the same performance, but there's a big difference in pricing for these two instances. Spot instances are types of VM instances that are available at a discounted price, but they can be terminated when the cloud service provider needs the underlying resource for another customer. This means that the organization using spot instances need to be prepared for an instance to be terminated, and they should take that into consideration when planning for applications and services. These spot instances are ideal for flexible, fault-tolerant workloads that can be interrupted, such as batch processing, big data analysis, and testing. Reserved instances are a type of VM instance that are purchased for a longer period of time, such as 1 or 3 years. Organizations that purchase reserved instances can save money on their cloud computing costs, but they are locked into the instance for the duration of the reservation. This means that organizations need to carefully consider the resources that they will need and plan for the long term when purchasing reserved instances. Reserved instances provide us with more stability and predictability for critical applications that require a guaranteed amount of computing resources, as the instances will not be terminated by the provider. Now, let's go back to our EC2 example of the T3 small instance. If I use this under the spot instance pricing, I will be paying 2.08 cents per hour, which is about 50 cents per day, or about $15 per month, or about $180 per year. And that's considering that we run it nonstop the entire time. Conversely, if I knew I was going to run the same EC2 T3 small instance every day for a year, I can instead purchase that using a reserved instance. Under the AWS EC2 T3 small instance pricing model, I would pay only 1.3 cents per hour, which is about 31 cents per day, or about $9.36 per month, or about $112.32 per year, regardless of whether we ran it for the entire year or just part of the year. So you can see that on the entire year basis, this cost savings of using a reserved instance would be a 38% discount over using the spot instance, but we are charged for the entire year regardless of how much or how little we actually use it. This is where reserved instances are great in cases where you know you will need a certain amount of virtual machines at a minimum, and then you can just use spot instances during peak periods to increase your capacity. For example, you might have 2 web servers running all the time as part of your minimum setup to ensure you have redundancy, but if your website is busy, you can just add traditional virtual machines. In this setup, I may have 2 virtual instances that cost me $112 per year, and then I can spin up new virtual instances whenever I need more capacity if my website gets busier, such as during a big sale period. So remember, reserved instances provide cost savings and stability, while spot instances offer low cost and flexibility. The choice between the two depends on the specific requirements of the workload and the trade-off between cost and performance that your organization is willing to accept.